I was born in 1976. I grew up here. This building is who I am. The patients, doctors, nurses, and staff, they truly are my family. Some thought I wouldn't make it, but great leaders fought for me. They believed that I could change Ottawa, Canada, even the world. And they were right. By the time I was 30, I'd saved thousands of lives, was recognized internationally, and had collaborated with over 40 countries. I've performed over 500 heart transplants, discovered the world's first genetic risk factor for heart disease, combined care, research, and education in one place, leading the way for innovation in heart disease throughout Canada and the world. I'm always thinking of the future and learning from the past. But through all this, I couldn't have done it, not without the people. The people here have taught me that through great loss can come great triumph, and that fear is never as strong as hope. I can't stop until there's a cure, and I will spend every second of my life trying to save yours. Some might say I've lived 1,000 lives, but I feel I'm just getting started.
Katie Rayner, and I am a researcher here at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, and my research lab studies the disease that's known as coronary artery disease. And that happens in the arteries that feed the heart with their blood. And the disease develops because of a process called atherosclerosis. And those are the plaques that build up and actually restrict blood flow to the heart. So what we're trying to understand is what is it about this disease that is so bad in some individuals that causes them to have either massive heart attacks or get disease at a very young age, yet in others that can actually, people can live with this disease for decades. And it's a process of inflammation. So my lab is really studying this process of, bad inflammation and how that differs from, say, other forms of inflammation that are of course good. Our goal is to really be able to identify people at risk of developing coronary artery disease, either at a younger age or before a heart attack happens, or really to be able to intervene earlier with either new therapies, new drugs based on this inflammation that we identify, or for other therapies that might exist.
Beats Radio, scientists interviewing scientists. Canada is a worldwide leader in science and innovation. However, our communities need to be more connected to current scientific research in order to drive the future of scientific innovation. So what steps can we take to more actively engage and connect our community with scientists and vice versa? Innovation and discovery are at the core of the current efforts of our government, but science sometimes gets slightly complicated to understand. At Beats Radio, we will tackle this by having young scientists and early career researchers interviewing scientists and innovators. By dissecting science in simple terms, this will allow our community to better understand the importance of science for our country. and the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, as well as eLife for supporting our endeavor here at Beats Research Radio. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you our first guest, Dr. Katie Rayner, who's sitting here with me today.
Hello, Hallie.
Awesome. So Dr. Rayner is an established scientist here at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute and is the director of the cardiometabolic microRNA laboratory, where her group focuses on how inflammation is dysregulated in atherosclerotic vascular disease and other metabolic diseases. Her lab also investigates how microRNAs can be used as therapeutics for future technology to treat these cardiometabolic diseases. And she's also an associate professor with the University of Ottawa in microbiology, biochemistry, and immunology. So without anything else, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks, Kelly.
So do you think you could tell our listeners a little bit about what you do and your background in science and how you found yourself researching here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I wouldn't say I was necessarily always interested in science. I don't classify myself as somebody who is, taking things apart or experimenting in the kitchen or, going out into the forest and taking,
samples.
Yeah. I think it always interested me, especially as I got through high school. But then I realized as you do, going through all the various science courses that you take, that I really wasn't that interested in, physics or even chemistry. Those things were always real challenging and not really interesting to me. But the sort of biology side of things and then the life sciences and human anatomy and those kinds of things were always really interesting. So then, I enrolled, as a lot of students do, into an undergraduate program in sciences at the University of Toronto. And actually what really got me into research there was a program called Laboratory Medicine and Pathobiology. And actually we have a very similar program here at Ottawa called Translational Molecular Medicine.
Right. And
the idea is that instead of just learning about biochemistry or systems or cells, you really do it in the context of disease. So, instead of learning how a cell, might communicate, through calcium signaling, you actually learn about how this is defective and might cause, some kind of rhythm disorder or something like that. And that really, really, really caught my attention. And that's how I actually learned that there was a such thing as a career in research. I had no idea. I don't think you see, medical research and scientists as being something, that you could actually, develop as a career. I think we think of, scientists as, bubbling over, flasks and that kind of thing. And that was just never, my interest. And so anyway, that's how I got interested in research. And I started immediately working in a cardiovascular lab at the University of Toronto in my fourth year with Dr. Michelle Bendeck. And she was looking at vascular diseases and how they develop. And then the rest is kind of history. I never stopped being interested in research after that. It was just very compelling, and it was something so interesting about being able to try to solve problems in the lab, and then those problems change and evolve. So I realized the excitement of being able to ask questions and try to answer them. And those questions change, and you become curious in something else. The more you learn, you can it becomes this so that's sort of how I ended up. And then, of course, a PhD in biochemistry here at the University of Ottawa. And then I did some postdoctoral research training in the U.S., in Boston and New York. And then, my hometown is Ottawa, so I was really happy to be able to come back here to start my independent research lab here at Heart Institute about 7 years ago or so.
Okay, wow, very cool. Yeah, so I think it's very, like what you were saying, it's really important to be able to see those applications early on, so that that interest just can keep developing, because it is hard from when you're learning the basic sciences, when you're growing up in your education, it's hard to sometimes see those applications. So that's in medicine, it's great to see those and do the research and look at those applications as an endpoint.
And I also think that the trigger word medicine is great, because I think that's exactly what I thought I was interested in, because of course it was human, it was disease, it was treating the diseases, which of course just assumes that you want to become a physician. But there was something about being a physician that didn't interest me per se. It was, but the medical aspect of it did, and that's when you really learned about medical research as being really a way to sort of continue to be engaged and part of the process, but without necessarily having to, see patients,
right.
so it's another, and I don't think we get exposed to that until much later on in training, which is unfortunate. So this is why another reason why these kinds of discussions are great.
So your medical research, what you're doing here at the Heart Institute in your lab, what would you say to somebody, maybe if you have a couple minutes in the elevator, to explain to them what you're doing
Sure.
and the application?
Yeah. So we know that the diseases that cause heart disease, so, we know about blockages in the arteries, and that's, what leads to heart attacks. And we know a lot of the risk factors. So, smoking, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, your family history, that kind of thing. But actually, what the disease in your arteries actually is a result of inflammation.
Right.
So inflammation is, the body's immune response to, usually an injury or an infection of some kind. But in fact, the excess cholesterol and other stresses in your body are what's causing a lot of the buildup in the arteries.
Okay.
So that's kind of that's a different way of looking at it. It's maybe a non-traditional risk factor way of saying it, because it's not easy for us at this point to sort of measure someone's inflammation, just like we could measure their cholesterol. But that's where the field is really moving towards, is trying to find a way to treat that inflammation in the heart.
Okay, cool. So do you think you could tell us a little bit about the role of inflammation in the development and progression of cardiovascular diseases?
So essentially what happens is that when there is something like an excess of cholesterol, which is, many adults, have excess high blood cholesterol, particularly LDL cholesterol. What happens is that it can actually get sort of stuck in your arteries a little bit.
Okay, yes.
And your immune system sees that excess cholesterol and actually is trying to clean it up. So it's actually trying to do its job as your immune system and get rid of it. So it's eating up the cholesterol. It's trying to, migrate it out of the vessel. But if that were only happening for a short period of time, your immune system could handle it no problem.
Right.
But of course, we live with elevated cholesterol over decades, right? So this is sort of a continuous insult to your blood vessels. So all this cholesterol is there, but then what happens is an immune reaction sort of perpetuates. So you get these inflammatory cells, your immune cells there in the artery trying to clean it up. If they can't, they'll signal to more immune cells to come in as backup. The other cells in the wall might die as a result of excess cholesterol and cell stress. That'll cause more immune cells to come. So it's kind of it's really this just propagation and perpetual inflammatory response.
Okay.
And at any one moment, it's not sort of dangerous, but over time, that's what leads to these, the plaque buildup over time.
So that buildup, is it just too much buildup, or is it the fact that it's just continually building up and it's causing these this inflammatory response to be working all the time, or is it really that it is growing and there might be a blockage?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So I think it's natural to we know that obviously if the buildup were to encroach so much on the artery and the blood flow in your heart is not sufficient, that would cause a heart attack or some other injury to your heart. But actually, even if the plaque buildup itself, the narrowing of the artery, is not complete or is not even necessarily that blocking the blood flow that much, it can still be very dangerous, because the inflammation that's happening, all of those cells that are in there are actually causing that vessel to be weakened. And it's the weakening of that plaque, it's the weakening of that buildup that actually can cause the rupture. And when that little plaque ruptures, it'll cause a clot, a blood clot. And that is what it ultimately causes the heart attack. So of course we don't want plaques and buildup that are actually impairing blood flow. But actually, even a smaller plaque, if it's really inflamed and there's a lot of debris and buildup, that can actually break open and cause a clot and cause a heart attack too. So it's not just the size of the plaque that matters, it's really the content of the plaque that matters.
Right. So what you're doing in your lab is trying to remove that or slow down the process or both? Right.
So there's a lot of ways that we know that, for example, if we take away the stimulus of inflammation, so if we lower cholesterol, that's a great way to reduce inflammation.
Yes,
and that can cause your plaques to kind of stabilize. It removes that inflammatory stimulus. So, there's really reduced amount of immune cells being recruited into that area. Okay. That's a great way. Exercise is another great way. It really reduces the amount of inflammatory activation in your blood vessels as well. So that's another way. But at the molecular level, what we're trying to do is either block the inflammation that's there, so something that's maybe happening maybe despite of low cholesterol. The reality is there are people who have lower cholesterol who still have higher inflammation in their arteries. So it's those people that we're really trying to identify and figure it out. And then we can block it. We're developing, testing new drugs and models in the lab. Or what actually we're trying to also do is provoke your own immune system to become anti-inflammatory, because your immune system is also responsible for the repair that you see in your body. So if you cut yourself, first the redness, the swelling, all that is your immune system, but so is the scar formation and the blocking off and the regeneration of your tissue. So that's actually your immune system too. So we're trying to then, manipulate the anti-inflammatory properties of your immune system as well. So it's not just, so we can remove the stimulus, reduce cholesterol, and then, also maybe, promote your body's own anti-inflammatory response.
Oh, okay, yes, I see. So how do you think you would explain this type of research being beneficial for the community? I mean, there are a lot of, as you were saying, people who have low cholesterol or high cholesterol. Right. There is that imbalance for a lot of people, but, having this technology pushed into the lab, like what you're doing, the research that you're doing, how can you maybe explain to our listeners how translational this can be for those people?
Yeah, well, I think we all know those people, right, who are sort of, they don't have high cholesterol, they don't have high blood pressure, they exercise, they're healthy, yet still they have heart disease. And of course, having all those other risk factors low is still very much reducing their disease burden and very much, helping them. But there are still things that we don't understand about the way that disease develops in the heart. And that is precisely where the inflammatory response is really coming into play. So what knowing more about inflammation helps us do is take this kind of really as a new risk factor. So something that we hadn't necessarily been targeting before. Right. And we know that the targeting that we're doing now is doing a great job. I mean, obviously, heart disease risk and incidence of heart disease are continuing to decrease, and that's all great. But we still know that there's a lot of disease that people have that are sort of despite of all of the other factors being, sort of good. Yeah, definitely. So that's going to help a lot of people who may be walking around with, there's a term residual inflammatory risk, and that's that, unknown of, what is the inflammatory reaction going on in your body. We don't know how to measure it yet. We don't know how to treat it yet. Right. But that's really what all the research that so many researchers here are doing.
I'm working on that. Cool. So the microRNAs that come up a lot on your profile and what you're working on. Do you think you could tell us a little bit what microRNAs are and how they're involved in this type of process?
So microRNAs are like little mini genes that come from your DNA, and what they do is they act to actually modify other genes. So they're little, they're small, and they're about 20 base pairs long, and they actually bind and inhibit other genes. And one microRNA can bind and inhibit potentially hundreds or maybe thousands of other genes. So rather than sort of the approach that most of us think about, when we think about our DNA and genes and how that leads to disease, we think, okay, we've got our DNA that leads to a gene and then a protein. Well, these microRNAs can kind of come in and modify along the way. So meaning, it's not just what's encoded in your genome or encoded in your DNA, but actually, potentially how these microRNAs are then regulating and feeding back. And it's part of the way that the cell can fine-tune its response. So let's say in the inflammatory example, let's say, you've got an infection, a bacteria comes in, the cell, mounts a strong inflammatory response. But maybe, during the resolution of that response, once it's gone, it needs to kind of turn down and kind of dial down its signal. It would use microRNAs to then bind and inhibit those genes just kind of ever so slightly to reduce the signal. So those are, we're trying to understand microRNAs because there are thousands of them kind of hidden away in the human genome, and they're being, they were only discovered, 15 years ago or something. So we're really trying to understand, what are the microRNAs that are controlling and fine-tuning these responses, because actually there are there's some good technology to inhibit these microRNAs. So there's a good number of therapeutic approaches, and they seem to be very safe in humans and all the trials that have been done. So really, it's up to us to figure out the biology. So we kind of have the tool to block exactly. So
figure out the puzzle and
that's exactly what we're doing. We sort of have a tool, and we now just have to find. We've got the hammer. We need to find the nail, basically. Yeah.
Cool. So you're a little reverse engineering.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So you've had a tremendous amount of success in your field as a female scientist. Do you think you could maybe tell our listeners any female
or anyone who's looking to, go into the STEM field and, start a career or even start just studies in STEM? Do you think you could give them a little bit of advice?
I think that some of the challenges with women in STEM or any underrepresented group is that they're exactly that, they're underrepresented. So what that means is that we naturally, when we see something in front of us as being, successful and possible, we're more drawn to do that. So certainly the times have certainly improved in terms of, the number of women in sort of top positions. But I think mostly what I don't think I entirely realized I was doing along the way was I was just surrounding myself with people that I thought were really excellent and great mentors and great colleagues. And I think that's true for any success. I think that, it's important to be, with people that inspire you and make you sort of a better scientist, a better person, a better mentor. So I think for anybody looking in that field, if your field happens to be, predominantly, male or again, whether you're part of another underrepresented group, there are still lots of great mentors within that group. And the more that, you can identify the people who will, help you succeed, the more anything you do to put into your success kind of will, you'll get a lot more return on that. So I think for women especially, that's, it's improving certainly. Having more people, in advanced positions, certainly helps, but we have a long way to go for other groups for sure. But, I'm hopeful that the more and more people are really aligning themselves with these successful stories, I think it'll help for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very good advice. And I think, surrounding yourself with people who have, are like-minded and are striving for the same things is very nice. I remember in my first year of university when I was in my engineering classes, I remember sitting with, all these great girls who I surrounded myself with, and everyone's like, oh, there's mustn't be very many girls in your class. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're all around me. So I remember that. I do. I also agree with that.
But it's funny that you say that, because that's actually what's so interesting about, women in the STEM field is that there are usually more women than men at the earlier stages, so whether it be in undergraduate or even early graduate school. But as you go up the ladder, women drop out. And they tend to drop out because of there's lots of research being done on this, and I certainly am not an expert in it, but one of the main reasons they drop out is because of a lot of the, the policies and biases that happen from the top down.
Right.
So, there's a lot of, discussion about getting, girls interested in STEM. Well, they're interested. We're here. We gotta stay. We gotta foster, and I think that, having people at the top who understand, the biases and the sort of the old boys clubs and things like that were really just not accessible to women before. Those are definitely starting to fade away. So hopefully that with it comes, more change. But you're right. I mean, looking around and saying, well, what do you mean? I've got a ton of great women around me. What's,
sure.
And then that's, people started to realize, well, they're going somewhere, and it's, it's leaving the field. And that's really where we have to do more work. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, your career has been, honestly, it's been so inspiring to talk to you and
thanks,
to be here with you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Very welcome.
On Geddes Research Radio. We will be right back with our next guest. Thank you for listening.
I was born in 1976. I grew up here. This building is who I am. The patients, doctors, nurses, and staff, they truly are my family. Some thought I wouldn't make it, but great leaders fought for me. They believed that I could change Ottawa, Canada, even the world. And they were right. By the time I was 30, I'd saved thousands of lives, was recognized internationally, and had collaborated with over 40 countries. I've performed over 500 heart transplants, discovered the world's first genetic risk factor for heart disease, combined care, research, and education in one place, leading the way for innovation in heart disease throughout Canada and the world. I'm always thinking of the future and learning from the past. But through all this, I couldn't have done it. Not without the people. The people here have taught me that through great loss can come great triumph, and that fear is never as strong as hope. I can't stop until there's a cure, and I will spend every second of my life trying to save yours. Some might say I've lived 1,000 lives, but I feel I'm just getting started.
Beats Radio, scientists interviewing scientists. Canada is a worldwide leader in science and innovation. However, our communities need to be more connected to current scientific research in order to drive the future of scientific innovation. So what steps can we take to more actively engage and connect our community with scientists and vice versa? Innovation and discovery are at the core of the current efforts of our government, but science sometimes gets slightly complicated to understand. At Beats Radio, we will tackle this by having young scientists and early career researchers interviewing scientists and innovators. By dissecting science in simple terms, this will allow our community to better understand the importance of science for our country.
Welcome back to Beats Research Radio. My name is Hallie Arnott, and I am your host for today. Now sitting with me is here Sean Geddes, and he is a business development manager at the University of Ottawa. Sean holds a very interesting job at the university where he's responsible and involved in assessing new technologies arising from scientific research that happens in the labs behind me and how we can push them into commercialization and what their commercial potential even is. And that's essentially just, trying to, really push what we're doing here in the lab into the clinics and into medicine or really any sort of scientific research. So good morning and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So do you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you landed your current job at the University of Ottawa doing what you do?
Sure. In terms of education, I did my Bachelor of Science at the University of Guelph in biomedical science. Then I continued on to do my Master's, which brought me to the University of Ottawa, and I did my MSc in cellular molecular medicine.
All right.
After completing my Master's, I was exploring some alternative career paths, and I started getting interested in expanding my background a little bit into business. So I continued to work in research for another 5 years. And while I was working, I completed my MBA part-time as well.
Okay, so you were working in a lab at the University of Ottawa?
Yep.
Okay.
And shortly before I graduated from my MBA, I transitioned into my current position.
Okay.
I guess leading up to that, I was getting really interested in commercialization of research results and how that process looked. Mm-hmm. And I started doing informational interviews. I actually had an interview with my ex-director.
Okay.
And it was something that really interested me, and I was able to go into that position.
Cool. So do you mind elaborating on some aspects of your work and how it is beneficial to the scientific community at the university, and how that extra step in research is sometimes not looked at when you're starting research, and why you're really important in the process?
Absolutely. One thing that I'd like to highlight is, I guess, first and foremost, University of Ottawa, educational institution, and one of our main goals is the development and training of our students. So one aspect of our office is promoting partnerships.
Okay.
And sometimes these partnerships, they create opportunities for the students involved in the research where they can work on site, or they're involved in the project, working closely with industry partners. And I think these opportunities are quite unique because it gives the students this interesting perspective and industry-related
like
skills.
Professional industry as well as education all together.
Yeah, and we really like to create these scenarios because sometimes a traditional academic route is not for everyone when they're doing the research. And sometimes these type of relationships lead to positions down the road where the company would like to pick up our talented students and trainees.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I guess that route, sometimes when you're in research, such as yourself, when you did a master's, but you decided to kind of take the business route, there are a lot of, transferable skills that you can provide in those different types of lines of work, right? Yeah, so would you say that the partnerships that you're creating, you're trying to facilitate partnerships between, I guess, science students or engineering students and a private company, or is that, or other faculties as well, other than just science and engineering?
I think everything.
Everything, yeah.
So in terms of, you mentioned science, engineering, so our office, we work with all faculties across the university.
Okay.
In our shop, myself and my colleague, we have our specific backgrounds, which leads us to working with specific faculties.
Right.
So for myself and my colleague Catherine, we work primarily with life sciences. So we work with faculty of medicine, CHIO, the Heart Institute.
Okay. And the partnerships, would it be PhD students or master's students, or are there also undergrads who would be involved as well?
All students, really.
All students, okay. Cool.
Usually it leads to a collaboration between a company and lab.
Okay.
And then it's really at the discretion of the principal investigator to decide who he's going to put on the project.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So would it be the students working with the company part-time and they spend some time there, or is it mostly the company that's coming to the university, or a bit of back and forth?
In different situations, it can look a little bit different.
Okay.
One thing that can put students on site at companies is we're involved with sometimes leveraging funds through grants, research opportunities. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with MyTax.
MyTax, yeah.
So we have some colleagues in MyTax who spend some time in our office, and we can connect with all of our researchers. And with those opportunities, the students actually have to spend time at the companies.
At the company, that's part of the deal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So in situations like that, we have our students going out there, students, postdocs, undergraduates as well, working with the company.
Definitely. So a word you use in your line of work a lot is technology transfer, I hear. Is this something that you'd be able to explain to our listeners a little bit about what technology transfer is?
Yeah, absolutely. So broadly, technology transfer encompasses all the steps in bringing research discoveries that start in labs like this into public space and ultimately to have impact on our society. Generally, it starts with the research. The research is typically disclosed to an office such as ours, and all universities typically have a shop like ours. And we perform an internal evaluation where we'll make recommendations on filing for intellectual property protection.
Okay, right.
And then following that, it would lead to marketing and building partnerships, licensing, license negotiations. And then from that point in the traditional licensing route, the company would generally pick it up, develop it further.
Right.
However, it's not just like research. It's never quite that linear.
Definitely.
It's a very reiterative process in terms of when we do our evaluation, sometimes we provide feedback.
Right, it's a continuous cycle a little bit.
Exactly, and sometimes there's a little bit of development that needs to be done to maybe strengthen claims for a patent application or really grab the interest of specific companies working in the space.
Definitely.
And in other cases where maybe we recommend to file a patent application,
Okay.
When we're interacting with companies, they want to come in and work with our research teams,
Okay.
develop it a little bit further, with a little bit of their insight as well into the process. And in those cases, they support the research both financially and with some resources as well.
Okay.
And they take it a little bit farther and then maybe bring it in as well.
Okay. So would the researchers who are working on, I guess, the scientific discovery or what they're looking to commercialize, do they normally come to you with a company in mind, or are you the one who is going to kind of go out and look for the company that would be the best fit?
I'd say it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Quite often, many of the researchers that we work with are very active and in the space, and they're the experts in the field, so they really know these companies that are working in this space. So we love it when they come with
an idea,
someone,
of course.
and companies that they know are in this space and they could potentially work with. But we also look for companies as well.
Okay.
Whether they're existing contacts we already have, and we build up these contacts by going to conferences. Recently, I spent some time in Philadelphia, the Bio conference.
Okay.
And it allows you to meet with a number of companies and explore their interests.
Okay.
So that's one thing I'd like to add about the technology transfer process. In the past, it used to be very much a push function, where the research would be developed, it would be protected and pushed out to companies.
Right.
And what we're really finding now is there's more of a pull.
Oh, okay.
Where we're talking to these companies, and just the way that their business models have shifted, they're talking with us and saying, we're interested in working in this field. Do you have researchers here? Can we collaborate?
Partnership. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there, I guess, there's only a certain amount that you can probably disclose from what a researcher has told you. So do you find it would be difficult to try and get people interested, or you find that they're interested without a lot of information at the beginning? Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, disclosure is a very tough issue, especially when working with intellectual property. We disclose what we can under terms of non-confidentiality. We usually position it that if you're interested in this, you have more data, more information, we could do this under confidentiality.
Right.
Where we could provide the information a little bit more detail. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, very hard to be like, you'll like it, but can't tell you everything.
And you feel it from both sides.
Right,
Everybody wants to get into the conversation a little bit more.
Yeah. So you're talking about this kind of reiterative process and having to go back with the feedback and then, see what the changes are and then possibly go back again with a little more feedback. Do you find that is there something where you're able to know if a discovery can become a product or a technology? Like if it's really going to make it there? Because I'm sure not everything is going to make it to commercialization. So how do you kind of know maybe if there's a telltale sign if something is going to make it?
It's a tough question. Because ultimately, in academia, quite often we can get these discoveries and inventions to a certain spot, and it's really the companies who come in who provide those resources and product development, and are pushing out the product ultimately. What we do is based on our analysis, and really our analysis entails looking at it from a commercial standpoint as well as patentability, which is more or less you're looking for a literature review, essentially, but not just restricted to scientific papers. Everything that's out there.
Everything, right.
And with that analysis, we make a recommendation on whether to invest in moving it forward.
Okay. Cool. That's like, yeah, because it's hard to know, a lot of, especially when the researcher, that's all, they're very invested. So I guess that can kind of sometimes be a little bit of a hard thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we would love for all discoveries to become product.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So discovery, would you say that there's a difference between discovery and invention? I think that's a differentiation that you have to figure out a lot in your line of work, because science isn't always a thing, right? It's a concept sometimes.
Yeah, because when you think of invention, you might think of like a device. Right. So we quite often see discovery and invention used interchangeably. And even if you look in standard agreements for sharing material, but in a research collaboration, discovery is under invention in their definition.
Okay.
For our work, what it really comes down to is everything that comes out of research is, I could say, is a discovery.
Okay.
And invention, we have to revert to how it's defined by patent law.
Okay.
Which is really around, is it novel, non-obvious, which comes down to all the literature that's out there, and that it's useful.
Right.
That's really that's how they define an invention, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a device. It can be a method. It can be a target.
Right. It's kind of broad. It's a bit of an umbrella.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So how do you see your office and what you do impacting the community, people who are listening to us today, and those people who are here at the Heart Institute in the hospital? How do you see what you're doing really helping those people?
Ultimately, what we hope is that the partnerships that we develop between our researchers and the companies that can bring these discoveries forward and into the public space, we're hoping that we can form as many successful partnerships as we can to help increase the amount of products that are going to have an impact on people in the community.
Right, exactly, and it requires a lot of interdisciplinary efforts. You need the researchers in science, and you also need a little background in business, kind of like what you have in order, and then the partnerships with those who are who are commercialized already. You kind of need all of those different people. So I think that's great that you're able to provide that to scientific research and scientists.
That's what we're hoping.
That's great. Awesome. So do you mind you telling us a little bit about how you decided to go from science to business, because you were in a master's, and maybe it's kind of a little bit of an unconventional turn, but a lot of people tend to sometimes do that, go from a scientific background and then kind of merge into business or anything else. Can you tell us a little bit about making that switch, or maybe something along those lines?
Yeah, no, it was a tough decision. Essentially, I was in my first year of my master's, and you're presented with that opportunity to switch into a PhD program if you'd like. So that was really the point where I was deciding on where I wanted to take my career path moving forward. I guess I loved research. I love what I did, which is why I love my job right now, is because I still get to keep
see a lot
a
of
foot in the door.
Yeah.
Very exciting research going on. I guess, as I mentioned before, I started exploring other opportunities on where I could, because I didn't want to let the research side go, but I wanted to expand into something a little bit different. And I came across our business development section of our office, and I thought it was such an interesting opportunity to be able to leverage both the science background as well as keep a foot in business as well.
Right. Okay. Very cool. So just before we go here, is there any key advice you can give any of our listeners who are keen on developing and innovating? Just anything that you kind of see with those products or those discoveries in those researchers who kind of get to that point. Is there something that you could give us about a little advice on how to get there?
I don't know. all the research that's going on at the Heart Institute is super powerful, and there's so much potential for all of the results that are coming out of this this building and the affiliated institutes and the whole research community in Ottawa. I would say if you're interested in the commercialization pipeline and you have something that you think could be of interest and commercially viable down the road, please reach out to us, and we're happy to support you along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I think reaching out to those people who know how to move it down the pipeline is definitely good advice. So thank you very much for joining us here at Beats Research Radio this morning. My name is Katie Rayner, and we're signing off now. See you guys next